Hi everyone, Mrs. Belo here. In this video, I'm going to be going over the topic of sex-linked inheritance, which in our modern genetics notes will cover slides 15 through 22. So before I start talking about what sex-linked inheritance is, I want to go over karyotype. So remember, this is a karyotype. This is for a somatic cell. There's 46 chromosomes in total, or 23 pairs. One came from mom, one came from dad. So this question is saying label the autosomes and the sex chromosomes. So the autosomes, remember, are going to be the first 22 pairs. So that includes everything that is numbered. So these are what you call your autosomes. So these are just basically all of the chromosomes that control for things in your body besides determining sex. The sex chromosomes are the last two right here. So these will determine sex, so male or female. Remember, this is a male because he is XY. Female would be XX. And you can also tell because the Y chromosome is actually a lot smaller. It's right here than the X chromosome. So if you had two that were the same size, that would be the X chromosome. But since this one has a smaller one, that's the Y chromosome. So these chromosomes control for sex, so biological sex, male or female. And they also control for a couple other traits as well. And just be aware that there are mutations even when it comes to sex chromosomes. So there is XXY. This is Klinefelter syndrome. So this is caused by a mutation during non-disjunction. So the person ends up with an extra, just like trisomy 21 Down syndrome, having an extra copy of chromosome 21. This one's just an extra copy of chromosome X. So that's Klinefelter syndrome. There's XYY. I think this is called Jacob syndrome. There is Turner syndrome, which is when you only have one X chromosome and there's another one that's missing. And then I think there's triple X syndrome is another one. And then I think there's one called Fragile X syndrome where I want to say a piece of the X chromosome is broken off. So even when it comes to sex biologically, like male and female, there can also be mutations like this that we can see as well. Okay, so we're going to be talking about typical male and female biologically. So females are XX, males are XY. And there are traits on there that do obviously determine sex, but also that play a role in other things in the body. So most traits that we've been talking about so far have been on the autosomes. Okay, hair color, eye color, skin color, things like that. Pretty much everything we've talked about until this point has been on the autosomes. A sex-linked trait is an allele, so some type of a gene, on a sex chromosome. Okay, so an allele or a gene. So there are more X-linked traits than there are Y-linked traits, just because the X, like I said, is so much larger than the Y chromosome. And you can see that here. This is the X chromosome. This is the Y chromosome. So there's more genes on the X chromosome. So a lot of traits we're going to talk about are typically going to be called X-linked, okay? Because they're going to be on the X chromosome. And obviously that can be different between males and females because males are XY and females are XX. So if there's a trait that's on there, it can be more frequent in like males or females depending on the trait. Because remember, males only have one. Males only have one X chromosome. So if like a trait is, let's say, recessive, so color blindness and hemophilia, that hemophilia is a blood disorder that affects your blood, is not able to clot properly, which can be very dangerous. These two traits are found on the X chromosome, and they are recessive. So, and males are XY, so if they have just one copy of that recessive trait, they will display it, versus a female would need 2 copies of the recessive trait in order to display the trait. So oftentimes X-linked recessive, these are more common in males. We will talk about X-linked dominant and then also X or Y-linked recessive and Y-linked dominant. But X-linked recessive traits are going to be more common in males than they are in females, simply because males only have one X chromosome and females have 2. So here's what that looks like, okay, in terms of genotypes. This letter B, this is a lowercase b, it kind of got caught up or cut off right there. Okay, so this is Y. So color blindness is a recessive X-linked trait, okay? So remember, so we're still talking about dominant and recessive. So I'm using capital B, okay, in order to represent that, okay? So color blindness is recessive, okay? So this right here, this is somebody who would be colorblind. This is someone who wouldn't be colorblind. However, you have to remember that we're talking about these things on X chromosomes. So this applies for females, okay? So this is for females, okay, this will work. So if a female is homozygous dominant, then she would be normal. She wouldn't be colorblind. If she is heterozygous, she would also be normal, but she would be considered a carrier. So she's not colorblind, but she's carrying the trait for colorblindness. The only way for a female to be colorblind is if she has both recessive traits. So you would need to get both copies in order to be colorblind. Colorblind females are extremely rare. However, remember, if we're talking about males, they only have one X chromosome. So there's 2 options for them, okay? Versus the female, there could be 3 options. Now, it's more frequent in males because only one recessive allele on the X chromosome will display then a male that is colorblind, versus a female would have to have 2 recessive alleles on the X chromosome. So so this is a normal, so this would be normal male, colorblind. So for a female, she would have to get 2 copies of the recessive traits. So for the female, you have to have 2 copies to display the trait, versus the male only needs 1 copy. So like the chances of a female getting both recessive alleles are not like super high. So it's very rare to have colorblind females. However, a male, he only needs 1 copy of that recessive trait in order to be colorblind. That's why colorblindness is so much more prevalent in males than it is in females. And when we're writing these, yes, I did this this format just to illustrate those differences, but when we're writing these with Punnett squares, we're going to use this format here with the X and the Y chromosomes. So in case you're wondering, so this is there's different types of color blindness. So this one is normal vision. I think one of the most common is red-green color blindness, so someone that has red-green. This picture would look like this to them, okay? And then one of the second most common ones I think is blue-yellow color blindness. So this picture would look like this to someone who has that. Complete color blindness, like you only see black and white, is very rare. So even within the spectrum of color blindness, there are varying degrees and different types of color blindness. So in the next video, I will talk about fruit flies and a sex-linked trait that is demonstrated in them.